Today, we're talking about shortening. This is cooking oil, just pretend that it's been hydrogenated. Writers tend to fall into one of two categories, those who write too much in a first draft and those who don't write quite enough. I'll be covering what should be done if you're in the latter camp on Friday. Today, we're talking about the former group. A novel that's too long for the story that it tells is going to have several problems. The pace might move too slowly, there might be unnecessary or repetitive scenes. The accepted convention around the length of a novel usually falls somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words. There are exceptions, of course. Certain genres like romance tend to be shorter. Middle grade and young adult fiction also tends to be shorter. And there are plenty of novels published every year that are way longer than this. Nevertheless, if your novel vastly exceeds this word count, you might be wondering if there's a way that you can trim it down. And that's what this video will help you do. So with that, here are 3 methods to trim the fat from your novel. Method number 1, do some more telling. There's no debate to be had that most of the time showing something to the reader is more effective than just telling it to them. The emotional engagement and immersion that you get from a well-shown scene is really important. The problem with showing is that it generally takes more words than telling to get across the same amount of information. I don't recommend that you go through and strip out all the emotional engagement from the story. Far from it. What you should do instead is see if there are any places or scenes in your story where showing is unnecessary. The emotional engagement and detail that you get from showing is important, except when it isn't important. There is always information in a story that the reader can just be told rather than shown. You see this a lot with traveling scenes. If a character is taking a plane somewhere, or walking somewhere, or driving somewhere, and nothing happens on that trip, but you've written a long scene describing the trip with a lot of sensory detail and action. When you could just have told the reader that the character arrived there. That will be much quicker and also has the potential to remove an unneeded scene, which is good if your novel is already too long. Showing is great when a scene has an impact on the story. If you're avoiding telling just for the sake of avoiding telling, then you could potentially be making your story longer than it needs to be. Method number 2, increase your trust in the reader. One common cause of overlong prose is worrying that the reader is not going to pick up on things. This results in over-explanation of everything happening in the story and potentially a novel that is too long. This type of writing can feel repetitive. The reader might feel like you're spoon-feeding them information. It can also zap their interest in the story since the reader won't have anything to figure out for themselves. Now there is a balance here between giving the reader enough information that they can pick up on foreshadowing or even just understand the plot. Finding this balance is tricky. There's really no other way than having a bunch of people read your novel and see what they pick up on or what they're confused by. This doesn't just apply to big plot level revelations either. You can also give too much information to the reader for very simple things. So try trimming back on this information. Strike a balance between relaying important detail and maintaining brevity when it's more useful to be brief. Make sure you engage with your beta readers or critique partners to make sure that you haven't removed too much information, and if you find out you have removed too much, then add back detail until you find the right balance. So what if you've done all these things and your novel is still 4 inches thick? What can you do then? Method number 3 to deal with an overly long novel, make it more than one novel. There is always the possibility that you've got too much story to fit into one novel. If you don't feel that there's any scenes that can be cut without hurting the core narrative, or you just really like what you have, then it might be best to split the story into multiple parts. This is, of course, much more complicated than just copy and pasting one half of your story into another document. Splitting a novel into 2 means that each part needs its own climax, its own beginning, middle, and end. And while the 2 might work together as one story, when you split them apart, they will need to stand alone, at least to a certain degree. Going down this route requires a significant amount of work. That's just a fact. Unless your novel is really long, you will likely need to add something to it in order to get it from one long book to the length of 2 regular books. But if you like the story the way it is, or you can't bear the thought of cutting anything, then this might be the best option. And after all, if the problem is you write too much, then having to write more seems like a pretty good problem to have. Stories have a natural length that they need to be in order to be told effectively. There are opportunities through more efficient prose and removing unnecessary scenes and removing unnecessary detail in order to make a story shorter. However, if you've exhausted those avenues, then there's really no other option. You either keep it the length it is or split it into multiple stories. Just like I'm glad you sat through this video for the length that it is, although this is probably a fairly normal length video for this channel. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday and occasionally on Friday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.